Okay, we're going to install the communication software RSLinx 2.57, and RSLinx is the first thing we install. We have to install it before we can install the soft PLC, Soft Logix 5800. You also need RSLinx to communicate to RS Logix 500 emulator and RS Logix 5000 emulator. So we'll be using the soft PLC though. It's a real PLC and it communicates with real I/O, and it has Ethernet cards, and the Ethernet cards allow us to use it like a real PLC in a plant where it's out on the east side and maybe the west side of the plant, and the two PLCs can communicate back and forth between each other, and we could download from the engineering station through the Ethernet over the plant into the PLC and modify the programs. So the first thing we're going to do is install RSLinx. You should go ahead and do this as an administrator, especially when we install Factory Talk View Studio. It's recommended you do it as an administrator. So if you've never logged in as an administrator before, notice if I right click on this and I say run as, and I pick administrator, I have to have a password, and most people don't put a password in when they set up XP. So to get a password, you do Control, Alternate, and Delete all at the same time. You press all three keys at the same time. You'll pop up applications typically, pick users, and pick log off. And it'll say, do you want to log off? And you'll say yes. You'll come to a logon screen, and you'll hit Control, Alternate, and Delete. Hold down all three keys at the same time, and you'll do that twice. And you hit Control, Alternate, Delete again, and you'll get a logon screen. It'll have your username in it. Type in administrator, just like you see here with a capital A, administrator. And when you do, you'll log in, and instead of being like I'm called Windows user here is my login name, instead you'll log in and it'll say administrator with a capital A. And you'll hit control panel. And under control panel, you'll have user accounts. User accounts. And you'll see Windows user and administrator. Both of these accounts will need to have a password. It's important you put a password in both of these. You'll need it for the database. So you'll click on your account administrator with a capital A, and you'll say, instead of change my password, you'll say create a password if you don't know the password, or change the password if you have. Main thing is you have a password, and you have to be logged in as an administrator. You'll see here, I'm a computer administrator already. So if you're a computer administrator already, this will be good enough to install the software, as long as you're a computer administrator, and that makes sure that all users can use the software if anyone else logs in. So if you don't have a password, click on create a password, put in your password. Mine is just lowercase password. Nobody's getting on my computer, so I just need a password for the software, and I put in lowercase password, and I just give it a hint as standard, and I changed my password, and I got this for the administrator and my account. Okay, so if you're an administrator already, you can just click on the file and start it and run it. If not, you can run it as an administrator. So I'm an administrator, so I'm just going to double click it and start the file. We click on required steps, and we click on install RSLinx Classic, install RSLinx Classic. And it takes a second to start up. And we hit next. And we accept the agreement. And we hit next. and here it wants your serial number. If you don't have an organization, just put in a dot. If we come to the file where the files were extracted, we have the README activation instructions. And this is the same serial number for almost every piece of software we install. It uses the exact same serial number. Be sure to watch the floppy drive and install the activation files first. If you don't have the activation files installed, this will not activate. It'll run for like a grace period of 7 days and it'll stop running. So SoftLogix, the PLC, SoftLogix 5800, will just start up, say activation is not found, and shut back down, and you can't even use it. So you need to install the master disk and activation files with the floppy drive, virtual floppy drive first. So be sure to go to the first step. This is all documented on the learncontrolsystems.com website under PLCs and software installation. So copy this serial number. This is the Rockwell activation number for all products. It works with everything except RSTune. RSTune will take the first 4 digits off, and with RSLogix 500 Pro, the last version they had before they wouldn't use master disk anymore had a different serial number. It's the only piece of software that has a different serial number, but this activation file still works with it. So you use a different serial number for RSLogix 500 8.3. So we copy the serial number and we paste that in to our enter your 10-digit serial number. You just right click it and paste and hit next. So we pasted it in. Be sure you get your username, organization, just put in a dot and hit next. Okay, here we want the standard hardware group. This is the electronic data sheets. This is what explains to the PLC and the programming software what kind of a hardware it is, if it's a processor or an input card or an analog card or whatever it is, and it explains to it how to configure it, how many words, what type of words, etc. And these are our configuration sheets. We call them the electronic data sheets. If you get a piece of hardware that it doesn't understand, you can use the EDS registration software that will be installed with RSLogix 5000, and it'll have a piece of software that allows you to register electronic data sheets, and you can download the electronic data sheet. Typically it'll recognize the hardware, go online, find the EDS file for it. All these files have a long number, a random long number. Well, it makes sense to them, but it looks like a random long number, and it ends with a .eds. And that's how you know what these files are. It'll download that and register it so you understand the piece of software. This piece of software will allow us to configure for that hardware device. Okay, nobody uses ControlNet anymore. It's a high-speed communication network, and hardly anybody uses it anymore. Almost everybody uses Ethernet now. So we're going to say this feature is not available. Just right-click on it. Just click on this. Just click on it. You don't have to right-click. Just click on it and say this feature will not be available. DeviceNet is a device-based network. It's what they call a bit-based network. It runs on the bit level, while ControlNet runs on the word level. It's more powerful and faster. But DeviceNet is a really cool network, and it was used a lot, but it's been phased out in the last 10 years, and most people have gone to Ethernet-based devices now instead of DeviceNet devices. I'll be using a little bit of it, so we'll talk about it. So the base drives, we won't use any drives. DeviceNet base hardware we'll use. Safety hardware we will not use. So click on it and say this feature will not be available. Drive communications, nobody's using drives. They used to use a lot of 1336s and PowerFlex 40s with DeviceNet in them, but nobody's using drives anymore. So check it out. Just like it is, the feature's not available. I'll be using some Flex IO modules, so I'm going to leave that in there. So I'm going to leave in the base hardware and the Flex IO modules. If you're not having any DeviceNet hardware, it makes this a lot faster to set up. It takes about 7 to 10 minutes to set this up, and it'll set up in like 5 minutes if you don't use these modules. So next is standard drives group, and again, we're not using standard drives group. Nobody uses those drives anymore, so just check that out. And again, it's this feature is not available. Click on it. And OPC documentation and samples. OPC documentations and samples is how to use RSLinx to communicate between HMIs and other software and your PLC. And this OPC stands for, some people call it Open Protocol Communications today, but it was originally designed, and most people refer to it as Object Linking and Embedding for Process Control. So that's some of your documentation on OPC. It is not difficult, it's real easy to use. Okay, we just hit next and install, and it'll install all the software. So it says installing FactoryTalk Services Platform. First it has to install what's called FactoryTalk Services Platform. And FactoryTalk Services Platform is what allows your software to talk back and forth before your PLCs, your HMIs, your security, your it even uses FactoryTalk activation to activate a lot of your devices, the newer software. It talks back and forth between a server. For FactoryTalk View Studio, we'll have to install a server. Now, this takes several minutes to install. You can watch the beginning setup if you want. Once it starts installing the electronic data sheets, it takes several minutes, so you can skip ahead, but be sure to come back and watch the end of this, because we're going to show you how to set up and configure RSLinx so it can communicate with the PLC, and we're going to see what it looks like, and we're going to actually browse our network and look at multiple pieces of equipment. And even if you don't have pieces of equipment, once you configure your SoftLogix PLC, it will actually browse that SoftLogix PLC, and we'll take a look at that and what it looks like. Okay, you can jump ahead in the video if you want. This takes a while. Don't think it's locked up. It takes a while to set up. Okay, now it's going to start installing the electronic data sheets. So it's decompressing the file cabinets, and in a moment it'll start registering all the files, the EDS files. There's hundreds of pieces of software. There's hundreds of pieces of hardware. So this takes a while to register all these pieces of hardware. We have the cabinets registered. Now we have to register the individual configuration for each piece of hardware we'll be installing. You know, you got MicroLogix, you got Slick 500, you got Compact Logix, you got Flex Logix, you got Control Logix, Soft Logix. So there's a lot of different cards and hardware that go with it. You got your PowerFlex drives, you got your communications adapters, input output modules, analog modules, DC modules. You got modules with diagnostics on it to see if everything's working okay for seal rating. Okay, we don't need to review the release notes, so we'll uncheck that and hit finish. Okay, and we hit exit. And what you're going to see is down here, if you expand out your icons, you'll see you got a new icon here. It says RSLinx Classic Communications. And what you can do is right click this, right click here, and customize notifications. And you can come down to RSLinx here. It says hide when inactive. I like to show it all the time, always show. My area network, I like to always show. And my volume, I like to always show. Okay, and hit OK, and OK, and now it's there. Now you gotta do is just click on this RSLinx Communication Services, and it brings up an empty window. Notice this icon right here. It's got a computer with computers on a network, and that's what it is. It's the network. Who is on the network? Rockwell Software. Who is on the network? And you click it, and you'll see right now it's showing nothing. That nothing is there. We have to configure drivers, and we can do this with this little cord. This little cord that plugs in here. We can click on that to configure our drivers. Or we can go to communications, click on it, and then come down to configure drivers. Okay, we have a drop down box right here. We drop this down and we'll see an RS232 DF1 devices. This is for your serial communications. If you want to communicate through a serial cable to a SLC 500, a small logic controller 500, or a MicroLogix, we'll select this. So let's install the RS232 DF1 and hit Add New. And you get a default name of DF1. You can rename this to RS232 if that makes more sense to you. You can name it anything you want and click OK. And you'll pick out your COM port that you're using on your computer. This here will be if you're communicating to a PLC2, a PLC5, a compact Logix, or a control Logix through the serial port, or a soft Logix through the serial port, you'll use PLC channel 0. If you're communicating with a SLC 500, use the SLC, small logic controller, channel 0. If you're communicating to a MicroLogix, you use the micro. And if you're communicating to a panel view, you'll use the panel view. Okay. If you don't know what your baud rate, your parity, and your stop bit and all that is inside the computer, say you got it used or someone's already used it, you don't know what rate they had, what baud rate the communication, it's bits per second they're communicating at, and what their parity is, and their error checking, you can just hit auto configure. Now, make sure you're plugged into the PLC and plugged into your laptop. If you don't have a serial port on your laptop or your computer, you can get a USB to serial adapter. And this USB will plug in, you install a small software driver, and it'll tell you either what the COM port is, or usually allow you to choose what COM port you want to use. 1 through maybe 23 or 50. You can have a lot of COM ports with this new software driving this USB hardware. So once you've plugged it in and you're connected to the PLC, all you have to do is hit auto configure, and it goes through all the baud rates, bits, and parity, checking to see what the actual communications protocol would be to establish communications. And here it says failed to find any because we're not connected. Check all cables and switch settings. So we'll just leave this the way it is and say OK. Okay, the next thing we'll do is add an Ethernet driver. Now, some of this older hardware equipment, all the new Ethernet equipment with Allen Bradley is Ethernet IP. That's this driver /IP. Internet protocol is what people think it is, but it's not. It's Internet protocol, but it's industrial protocol. TCP/IP is a transmission control protocol, internet protocol. But with this Ethernet IP, the IP stands for industrial protocol, and it's a CIP communications type driver. It's an open communications type driver, and it stands for industrial protocol. But we want to install Ethernet devices. A lot of the older devices will not communicate with IP. So we'll put Ethernet, ETH1. You can spell out Ethernet if you want, if it makes more sense to you. And we'll hit OK. And it asks for a host name or an IP address. Well, with SoftLogix, you can't add a host name. You have to add an IP address. And we'll discuss this in detail when we install SoftLogix. And we add a couple more IP addresses onto your network card. You can add 4, 5, 6 network cards, network IP addresses on your network card. The card can handle more than one IP address, and you can install up to 6 Ethernet cards in the SoftLogix soft chassis. They actually are individual software network cards, and they'll communicate separately. So you can have one processor and one network card, and another processor and another network card, and you can have up to 6 processors and 6 network cards. It also has simulated I/O that works like local real I/O, and you can actually click on the screen and turn it on and off. You don't have to toggle the bit, and it maintains its input status of on or off, and it shows the output and maintains that status on or off. So I'm just going to put in an address here that I know I have a piece of hardware in, 192.168.200.110, and that's my point I/O, and my point I/O has a rack, and we'll look at it, and I'll just hit OK, and we'll close this. And if we expand out the DF1 driver, you'll see you got your workstation, but there's no SLIC or MicroLogix because none are connected right now. If I expand out the Ethernet, it takes a second to go out and scan. This is in auto browse mode. That means it's constantly scanning the network, and you'll see we have this is our point I/O, and here's a backplane for our point I/O. We expand it out, we'll see all the point I/O modules in it. Okay, this is an 11 slot rack. If I right click on my point I/O Ethernet adapter and come down to module configuration, I can click on port configuration, and you can see I can give it a dynamic or a static IP address. Now, if you set your adapter, the adapter has a spin wheel, and it doesn't always work. It's supposed to be whatever network you're on, it'll dial up the address, but I found it only works on if you're 192.168.1 and then you dial up some number like 100, it'll give you a 100. On other networks it doesn't want to work, but you set the spin wheel to 888, and that gives you dynamic host connection protocol, and you're able to connect and see what this adapter is and get it on your network and see it. And then you dial 999, and then you put in a static IP address, and it'll keep that IP address for you. So mine here is 192.168.200.110. Yours might be 110, 100, whatever you want to call it, 50. But all your devices have to communicate on the same network address. That's those first 3 numbers, these first three numbers, these first three octets, if you don't understand this, study the basic networking. These first three octets set your network address, and they all have to be on the same network or they can't communicate unless you go through a router. And that's kind of a pain in the butt to set up. So you want to keep them all on the same network. Now for a host name, it doesn't like starting with a number. It wants to start with a letter. So we could go like .io anet, and whoops, I misspelled it. .io anet, and just hit OK. Apply, and it's downloading the configuration, and we're changing the host name of this adapter, and now there it is. I said an error happened. I don't know why. Okay, if we open it back up, we should have that host name in there. So module configuration and and it did say that. I don't know why there was an error. It did work. Here's your chassis configuration, and this is where you can put in how many modules you have. And these modules, see, it's 0 through 10. That includes the adapter as well. So you have to include adapter. This isn't a 10 chassis. This has 00 adapter, so it's 0 through 10. So this is 11. So this chassis is a size of 11. Okay. Let's go back in here and configure this again. So we can just right click on it, and we can say configure driver. We can click on the hose up here, the network cable, and we can configure adapter there. We can configure drivers there, or we can go back to communications and configure drivers. Any of these will do the same. If we click on this, and if I put in that name, .io anet, we can do the same thing on Reflex.io. I don't remember what it is, and we hit OK and hit close. In a second, it should pop up with that adapter name in there also. And there it is, just popped up. See, .io anet. It found it, and there it is. And you can get the same thing with a host name. But Rockwell recommends using an IP address rather than dynamic host connection protocol. And like I said before, you can't even put in a host name into a SoftLogix adapter. It wants an IP address when you install it. Okay, so let's close this out. Now we need to add the important one, Ethernet IP. So configure drivers. Drop down, pick Ethernet IP driver, and again this is Ethernet IP industrial protocol, and click OK. Now here you have a choice of clicking on the adapter itself or using the Windows default. I use the Windows default. That allows you to use your Ethernet adapter that's built onto your motherboard, or you've inserted in the motherboard, or it'll use your wireless Wi-Fi adapter. It'll use either one you've got installed. So I just use the Windows default. And that's all it is. It says it's running, close. And now you'll see Ethernet IP will go out automatically and find everything that's Ethernet IP on your network. You don't have to put in an address for it. So here you can see I got a MicroLogix. Here I got a 1794 Flex IO adapter, and it has some modules in it. This one here is a 4 input, 2 output, a non-isolated analog input, and a HART input module. And again, we can right click on it, say module configuration, and you'll see the port configuration here. There's no configuration for chassis size, but you do have a static and a dynamic, and again we like to go with a static IP address. So the last one was 110, this will be 111, next one's 112, next one's 113, and this here is my soft PLC, my SoftLogix 5800 that I use in my process simulator. And it's on a real little 8x9 by inch and a quarter thick FX 160 Dell computer. And it's plenty fast what I do. I don't even work on it. I just use they call it Radmin, remote administration, and I remote into it and work on it on my desktop, and then I come out of it and I can watch it run. But if we click on this, you see I've got two Ethernet adapters inside this SoftLogix. I got a 131 and a 132. You'll see they're SoftLogix 5800 Ethernet IP adapters, and they're in software, but they work just like a real network card, and they run off the same network card that's on your computer. So you see I've got two SoftLogix controllers, SoftLogix 5860 controller. And I called this L10, it really should have been an L60. L60 unit 1000. This would be like on the east side of the plant. Then I've got an Ethernet controller for it. And then down here I've got another one. I've got an L6 SoftLogix controller, L60, and this is unit 2000. This would be like on the west side of the plant, and it has an Ethernet adapter. So these work just like if they were two different PLCs. And I can have up to 6 PLCs, 6 controllers running in there, which is the same as 6 PLCs communicating back and forth between each other. And they can send messages back and forth and use messaging, and they can use produced and consumed tags, which is another way. They consumed and produced tags don't have to run over the backplane. They can run over the Ethernet as well, and I'll show you how to configure that later. And these also have simulated 32-point input and 32 output simulator modules. Okay, next thing we want to do is add configure drivers. We need to add the virtual backplane for this is the virtual backplane for the SoftLogix 5800. Now, whether you're using an emulator or you're using the soft PLC, they both use the SoftLogix 5800 backplane. So you have to put, this would be 5810, 30, or 60, and we've got a 5860. It's a 17 slot rack, and it has a slot 00 plus 16 slots for 17 slots. So we click on that, virtual backplane, and we add, and it says VBP, virtual backplane 1, and we add it, and it's running. That's about all you can do until we put something in there. You won't see anything else on it except your workstation, and it's just RSLinx server it puts in there. We're going to install SoftLogix next. You'll see this work. We need one more driver. So communications, configure drivers, and we come down to our SLIC 500 DH485 emulator driver. This is Data Highway 485. It's an older network, but it's still used in a lot of SLICs and a lot of MicroLogics. So most of them have, the newer ones have Ethernet built in. We don't have to worry about it. But the older ones use the serial communications port, and they use a protocol called Data Highway 485. And we'll use this on our emulator, our RSLogix Emulate 500, where we'll simulate MicroLogics and SLIC 500 computers, processors, and controllers. They're really not computers. Only the newer ones have computers built in. The SoftLogix 5800 is a computer-based controller, but these are all hardware controllers. But we'll use that to communicate with our emulator and run programs in MicroLogics and SLIC 500. So we'll add that, click on it, and add new. And this is asking, what is the station number? Well, on Data Highway, you get 32 stations on the network. And a station can be a workstation, It could be some kind of a display or a recorder. It could be, and in this case here, we're going to use PLCs. So it could be a Micrologics or a PLC2 or a PLC5, which aren't used anymore. But it's more likely it's going to be a Micrologics or a SLC 500. And your computer, your engineering station, this is the engineering station we'll be communicating on. So it goes from 0 to 31, 32 nodes. They call it a node. And we'll just leave this at 1. We can set this, we can set our engineering station to 31 and then set our SLC 500 to station 0 and our Micrologic to station 1. But we'll just leave it at 0 and we'll set our Micrologics or our SLC 500 at station 1 when we start it up in the simulator. And hit OK. And we're done. Close. And as you see, you have workstation underneath here. Once you start load a program in the emulator, if it's a Micrologics, you'll see a Micrologics. If it's a SLC 500, you'll see a SLC 500 here. Once we take this virtual backplane, we install our processor and our cards and our simulator cards, they'll look just like this. In other words, you'd put in RSLinx server, we got RSLinx Enterprise if we install Enterprise later. We've got our controller and our Ethernet card and our simulated .io input-output simulator. And that'll show up underneath this virtual backplane once we set up SoftLogics. Okay, one more thing to do is go to View. This is very important. View and Options. This is very important. You'll see this accept UDP messages on Ethernet port. This is user datagram protocol. So we use, if we study networking again, review our networking, we got TCP/IP, transmission control protocol / internet protocol, and we also use UDP, user datagram protocol, and user datagram protocol just sends the messages out. It doesn't check to make sure they're in order. It doesn't check for a receipt to make sure you received it. It just keeps sending them out. And we use this a lot for analog. But if we leave this on and we reboot, our Ethernet IP devices will turn to computers and it won't communicate correctly. So Rockwell has the solution of uncheck this and not to use it. And this is recommended in the SoftLogics manual. And that's how they correct it, by unchecking accept UDP messages and use TCP/IP messages only. It's a little slower, but it's safe and everything works and your Ethernet IP continues to work. And hit apply. Very important. Uncheck accept UDP messages on the Ethernet port and hit OK. All right, we're configured and ready to go. Our communications are working. So let's get setting up the rest of the software.